She laughed. You're mad over a birthday? That's childish. I said calmly, don't worry. You forgot mine, but I don't forget much. That evening, she walked into a surprise party for her best friend, and I was holding her hand. I, 31M, never thought I'd become the kind of person who keeps score in a relationship. But sometimes life teaches you that the people closest to you can hurt you in ways you never imagined. And when that happens, you learn to pay attention to patterns you once dismissed as accidents. My wife forgot my birthday. Not in the way someone forgets to pick up milk from the store. This was deliberate indifference wrapped in convenient amnesia. The morning came and went without acknowledgement. I waited through breakfast, through her scrolling on her phone, through her getting ready for work. Nothing. I told myself maybe she was planning something for the evening, some surprise that would make the silent morning worth it. But evening came, and she walked through the door with takeout, plopped on the couch, and asked what I wanted to watch. When I finally mentioned it was my birthday, she laughed. Not a small, embarrassed laugh of genuine forgetfulness, but a dismissive sound that made my stomach turn. She told me I was being childish for making such a big deal about a birthday. Adults didn't need parties and cake and attention, she said. I should grow up. I said nothing. I just nodded and told her not to worry about it, that I didn't forget much. She didn't catch the weight in those words. She never did. That night, while she slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying 3 years of marriage in my mind like a film reel I'd watched too many times but never truly analyzed. The forgotten anniversaries she blamed on work stress. The canceled plans when her friends needed her. The way my accomplishments at work were met with distracted nods while her colleague's promotion earned a celebration dinner I was expected to pay for. The gradual erosion of being seen, being valued, being remembered. But what kept me awake wasn't just the hurt. It was the memory of her best friend's birthday party from 2 months ago, the one my wife had planned for weeks, hand-making decorations, coordinating with a dozen people, spending money we'd agreed to save. I'd helped, of course. I always helped. And her friend had been gracious, thanking me specifically for putting up with the chaos my wife had created in our home during the preparation. That's when I'd noticed something in the way her friend looked at me, something sympathetic, like she knew exactly what kind of person my wife was and felt sorry for anyone close to her. Her name was irrelevant to this story, but her presence would become central to everything that followed. She was the friend my wife valued above all others, the one whose opinion mattered, whose approval my wife craved. They'd known each other since college, one of those intense friendships that sometimes felt more important than any romantic relationship. My wife would drop everything for her, cancel our plans, prioritize her needs. I'd accepted it as part of the package, the way you accept that some people have demanding jobs or complicated families. I started paying attention after my forgotten birthday. Really paying attention. I noticed my wife remembered every small detail about her friend's life, her preferences, her schedule, her casual mentions of wanting something. I noticed she remembered her other friends' birthdays, sending thoughtful gifts and organizing gatherings. I noticed she remembered her parents' anniversary, her brother's graduation, her coworker's promotion party. She remembered everything that mattered to everyone except me. 3 weeks after my birthday, I ran into her best friend at a coffee shop near my office. It wasn't planned, just one of those coincidental moments that change trajectories. She was sitting alone, working on her laptop, and she waved me over. I sat down, and we talked. Really talked, for the first time without my wife between us as a buffer or translator. She asked how I was doing, and something in her tone made me honest. I told her about the birthday, about the pattern I'd noticed, about feeling invisible in my own marriage. She didn't seem surprised. She said she'd noticed things too, the way my wife talked about me when I wasn't around, always with a slight edge of criticism or dismissal. She wanted to say something, but didn't know if it was her place. We kept talking, and the conversation shifted from my marriage to her own struggles. She'd recently ended a long-term relationship, also feeling unseen and undervalued. There was an understanding between us, a recognition of shared experience that created instant connection. Before we parted, she told me if I ever needed someone to talk to, someone who understood, I could reach out. I took her number, telling myself it was just friendship, just support. But I knew even then it was more than that. Over the next month, we texted occasionally. Nothing inappropriate, just check-ins and conversations that felt more substantial than anything I'd had with my wife in months. She listened. She asked questions. She remembered things I'd mentioned in passing and followed up on them later. It was intoxicating, being remembered, being seen. I found myself looking forward to her messages more than coming home. My wife noticed nothing. She was busy planning another event, this time a surprise party for a coworker. She spent evenings on the phone coordinating, weekends shopping for decorations, money from our account on elaborate gifts. I watched it all with growing clarity. This was who she was. This was who she'd always been. I'd just been too invested in making the marriage work to see it clearly. During one of our coffee shop meetings, they'd become regular by then. Her best friend mentioned her own birthday was coming up in 2 months. She said it quietly, almost embarrassed, mentioning she wasn't planning anything because she didn't want to burden anyone with organizing something. She'd spent too many birthdays feeling like an afterthought in her own celebrations. I understood that feeling intimately, and that's when the idea formed, not fully developed yet, just a seed of possibility. I asked her what she'd want if someone did plan something for her, something perfect. She looked surprised by the question, then thoughtful. She described something simple but meaningful, close friends, good food, maybe at that Italian restaurant she loved, but never went to because her ex had always said it was too expensive. She wanted to feel special, she said, just for one evening. I told her I'd make it happen. She protested, said I didn't need to do that, but I insisted. I told her everyone deserved to feel celebrated on their birthday, to be the center of someone's attention, to be remembered. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, and thanked me. Then she paused and asked what my wife would think about me planning her best friend's birthday party. I told her my wife would probably be thrilled someone was handling it. One less thing for her to organize. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. I spent the next several weeks planning. I kept it secret from my wife, telling her I was working late on a project. I coordinated with the friends' other friends, people I'd met through my wife, but who'd become friendly with me over the years. I booked the Italian restaurant, arranged for her favorite dessert, picked out a thoughtful gift. I put in the kind of effort my wife put into everyone's celebrations except mine. And somewhere during that planning, during the frequent meetings with the birthday girl to discuss preferences and guest lists, our relationship shifted. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was gradual, like water wearing down stone. We both knew it was happening. We both knew it was wrong. But we also both knew we'd found in each other what was missing in our other relationships. She held my hand one evening while we were reviewing the restaurant menu. I didn't pull away. Neither did she. The day before the party, my wife came home excited. She'd heard through mutual friends that someone was planning a party for her best friend, and she wanted to know who so she could help. I told her it was supposed to be a surprise, and she shouldn't spoil it. She spent the evening speculating about who it could be, which of their friend group would be thoughtful enough to organize something. It never occurred to her it might be me. I didn't exist in that category in her mind, the category of people who planned meaningful gestures for the people they cared about. The evening of the party, I told my wife we needed to be at the restaurant by 7 for dinner. She assumed it was a regular date night, seemed mildly annoyed I'd planned something without checking her schedule first, but agreed to come. I wore my best suit. She wore jeans and a casual top, the kind of thing you wear when you're not expecting anything special. We arrived at the restaurant, and I guided her toward the private room I'd reserved. She followed, confused about why we weren't sitting in the main dining area. I opened the door, and she saw them. All her best friends' closest friends, decorations in her favorite colors, a banner that said happy birthday. And at the center of it all, her best friend, looking beautiful in a dress I'd helped her pick out days before. My wife's face went through several emotions in rapid succession. Confusion, surprise, realization, then something else, something harder to read. Her best friend rushed over to hug her, thanking her for coming to the surprise party, and my wife's eyes found mine over her friend's shoulder. She'd figured it out. I'd organized this. I'd planned an elaborate surprise party for her best friend. I, who supposedly didn't care about birthdays, who she'd called childish for wanting acknowledgement on my own birthday. The party proceeded. I played the role of gracious host, making sure everyone had drinks, that food was served on time, that the birthday girl felt celebrated. My wife watched me all evening with an expression I'd never seen before. It might have been anger. It might have been hurt. It might have been the dawning realization that she'd fundamentally misunderstood who I was and what I was capable of. Midway through dinner, I sat next to the birthday girl. We talked and laughed, and I held her hand on top of the table where everyone could see, including my wife. It wasn't aggressive or showy, just natural, the way two people who care about each other might hold hands. Her friends noticed. They smiled, maybe thinking we looked good together, maybe wondering about the dynamics they were witnessing. My wife noticed most of all. After dinner, while everyone mingled, my wife pulled me aside into the hallway. She asked what I thought I was doing. I told her I was celebrating someone's birthday, making them feel special on their day, showing them they mattered. She said I was making a scene, that people were noticing how I was behaving with her friend. I asked if she meant noticing that I was treating her friend the way I'd wanted to be treated on my own birthday. She went quiet. Then she said the thing I'd been waiting for her to say, the acknowledgement that had taken 2 months to come. She said she was sorry about my birthday, that she'd been stressed and it had slipped her mind, but that didn't mean I should humiliate her by being inappropriate with her best friend at a party I'd apparently planned behind her back. I told her I hadn't been inappropriate. I'd been attentive. I'd been present. I'd been the opposite of indifferent. If that looked inappropriate to her, maybe that said more about what she thought appropriate attention looked like. She demanded we leave. I told her she could leave if she wanted, but I was staying. I'd planned this party, and I was going to see it through. She stared at me like she didn't recognize me. Maybe she didn't. Maybe I'd been someone different for so long, someone accommodating and understanding and endlessly patient, that this version of me, the one who planned elaborate parties for other people, who held hands with her best friend, who refused to leave when told, was completely foreign to her. She left, walked out of the restaurant, and drove home in her car, leaving me there. I returned to the party, and the birthday girl asked if everything was okay. I told her it was fine, that my wife had something come up. No one believed me, but they were polite enough not to press. We continued celebrating, and at the end of the night, I drove the birthday girl home. We sat in my car outside her apartment, and she asked what happened with my wife. I told her the truth, that my wife had realized what was happening and didn't like it. She asked what was happening. I told her I thought she knew. She did. She said it wasn't right, that I was still married, that she was my wife's best friend, that this would destroy multiple relationships and hurt people we both cared about. I agreed with all of it. Then I asked if any of that changed how she felt. She was quiet for a long time before admitting it didn't. She felt terrible about it, guilty and conflicted, but it didn't change the fact that she'd developed feelings for me, that she valued our connection, that being with me felt right in a way her previous relationship never had. I walked her to her door, and she kissed me. It was brief, tentative, loaded with months of growing attraction and mutual understanding. Then she went inside, and I drove home to face whatever waited for me there. My wife was awake, sitting in the dark living room. She turned on the light when I walked in and asked if I'd slept with her best friend. I said no, and I hadn't. Not yet. That qualifier hung in the air between us. She asked if I was going to. I told her I didn't know, that I hadn't planned any of this, but that something had developed between us that felt more real than anything in my marriage had felt in years. She cried. Real tears, the kind I hadn't seen from her in our entire relationship. She said I was cruel, that I'd orchestrated this whole thing to hurt her, to get revenge for a forgotten birthday. I told her it wasn't about revenge. It was about finally understanding my own worth, about recognizing that I deserved to be with someone who remembered me, who saw me, who treated my existence as something valuable. She'd taught me I was forgettable. Her best friend had taught me I wasn't. Update 1. The next morning, my wife called her best friend. I don't know exactly what was said, but I heard my wife's side of the conversation from the bedroom. She was alternating between crying and yelling, asking how her friend could betray her like this, accusing her of stealing her husband, saying she'd never forgive her. When she hung up, she came into the bedroom where I was packing a bag and told me her friend had admitted everything. Not that there was much to admit. We hadn't crossed most of the physical lines people associate with affairs. But the emotional intimacy was undeniable, and in many ways, that was worse. I moved into a hotel that day. My wife called repeatedly, oscillating between anger and desperate attempts at reconciliation. She promised to be better, to pay more attention, to make my next birthday unforgettable. I told her it wasn't about the birthday anymore. It had never really been about the birthday. It was about years of being taken for granted, of being treated as less important than everyone else in her life, of watching her give her best self to everyone except me. One forgotten birthday was just the moment I stopped making excuses for the pattern. Her friend, I should start calling her by some identifier, even if not her real name. Let's call her Kate. Kate texted me that she needed space, that the situation had gotten too complicated, that our connection wasn't worth destroying a lifelong friendship. I understood. I told her I wouldn't pressure her, that she needed to make whatever decision she could live with. But I also told her I wasn't going back to my wife. Whether Kate and I pursued anything further or not, my marriage was over. I'd seen too clearly what it actually was. 2 weeks passed. I stayed in the hotel, went to work, started looking at apartments. My wife sent me long texts about couples therapy, about working through this, about how every marriage had rough patches. I didn't respond. Kate stopped texting entirely. I assumed she'd chosen the friendship, and I respected that, even though it hurt more than I wanted to admit. Then one evening, Kate showed up at my hotel. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. She said she'd spent 2 weeks trying to convince herself we were wrong, that we'd built our connection on the shaky foundation of unhappy relationships and hurt feelings. She tried to repair things with my wife, to go back to how their friendship used to be. But every conversation with my wife was now tainted by what had happened, by the knowledge that I'd held her hand at that party, that I'd planned something elaborate for her while being married to her best friend. Kate said she'd realized something during those 2 weeks. Her friendship with my wife had been one-sided for years. My wife had always been the center of attention, the one whose problems took priority, whose drama consumed their conversations. Kate had been the supporter, the listener, the one who accommodated. When Kate had gone through her breakup, my wife had been sympathetic for about a week before redirecting conversations back to her own issues. The birthday party I'd planned, the one where I'd made Kate feel truly celebrated, had been more thoughtful than anything my wife had done for her in years. She asked if my offer still stood, if there was still room in whatever new life I was building for someone who came with a lot of complicated baggage. I told her there was. We both knew it wouldn't be easy, that mutual friends would take sides, that my wife would never forgive either of us, that some people would see us as the villains in this story. But we also knew that sometimes you have to choose your own happiness, even when it comes at a cost. Update 2. The divorce was brutal. My wife fought everything, not because she wanted to save the marriage, but because she wanted to make me suffer. Her lawyer tried to paint me as an adulterer who'd groomed her best friend, which wasn't supported by any timeline or evidence, but made for dramatic court filings. My lawyer countered with documentation of her financial irresponsibility, the way she'd spent joint money on other people's celebrations while dismissing my needs as childish. The mutual friends split into camps, as expected. Some sided with my wife, viewing Kate and me as having had an emotional affair that destroyed a marriage and friendship. Others, particularly those who'd witnessed years of my wife's self-centered behavior, were more sympathetic to our side. A few people reached out to me privately to say they'd always thought my wife took me for granted, that they weren't surprised things had ended this way. My wife's family was predictably hostile. Her mother called me multiple times, leaving voicemails about how I'd ruined her daughter's life, how I was throwing away a marriage over pride and ego. Her brother sent a threatening text that my lawyer advised I report to the police, but I chose to ignore. They'd always seen me as an extension of my wife, not as a full person, so their reaction made sense. Kate lost most of her mutual friends with my wife, which meant losing most of her local friend group. It was hard on her, harder than she'd anticipated. She'd known there would be social consequences, but living through them was different. She cried a lot during those months, mourning the loss of relationships she'd valued, questioning whether what we had was worth what it cost. I held her through those moments, reminded her that real friends would have tried to understand rather than immediately condemning her, told her we'd build new connections with people who saw us clearly. We moved in together 6 months after I'd left my wife. It felt fast by traditional standards, but we'd already been through more intensity than many couples experience in years. We knew each other's worst qualities, our damage, our baggage. There were no illusions. We also knew we worked in the mundane ways that matter. We split chores without arguing. We remembered each other's preferences. We showed up for each other consistently. My birthday came around again, almost a year after the forgotten one that started everything. Kate woke me up at midnight with a small cake, sang to me off-key, gave me a thoughtful gift she'd clearly spent time selecting. The next morning, she'd arranged a day of activities I actually enjoyed rather than things she thought I should enjoy. She'd invited my close friends, the ones who'd remained loyal through the divorce. She made me feel celebrated, remembered, seen. That evening, after everyone had left, she asked if it had been good, if she'd done enough. I told her it had been perfect. Then I told her the truth, that the birthday itself wasn't really what mattered. What mattered was that she'd paid attention all year. She'd remembered small things I'd mentioned and brought them up later. She'd prioritized my needs alongside her own. She'd treated me like I was valuable, not because it was a special occasion, but because it was how she treated people she cared about every day. She said my wife had texted her that day, the first contact in almost a year. My wife had sent a long message about betrayal and karma, suggesting Kate would eventually experience what it felt like to be abandoned by someone she loved, that what we'd built on the ruins of other relationships would eventually crumble. Kate had blocked her after reading it, but the message had shaken her. I asked Kate if she ever regretted how things had unfolded, if she wished we'd met under different circumstances, if the cost had been too high. She thought about it for a while before answering. She said she regretted hurting people, regretted the messy way it all came out, regretted losing friends and damaging relationships. But she didn't regret choosing herself for once, choosing connection over obligation, choosing to be with someone who made her feel valued. Update 3. 2 years after my forgotten birthday, Kate and I got married. Small ceremony, just close friends and my family. Her parents came despite their initial reservations about how we'd gotten together. They'd spent time with us, seen how we treated each other, and eventually admitted they understood why she'd made the choices she'd made. I heard through mutual acquaintances that my ex-wife had moved to a different city, started fresh somewhere. She didn't have to face the social fallout of the divorce. Apparently, she'd told people their version of the story where I was the clear villain, which was fine. Everyone needs a narrative they can live with. One of my ex-wife's friends reached out to me around that time, someone who'd initially cut me off after the separation. She apologized, said she'd had time to reflect on the dynamics she'd witnessed over the years. She admitted she'd seen how my ex-wife had treated me, how dismissive she'd been, but had convinced herself it wasn't her place to say anything. She'd watched my ex-wife plan elaborate gestures for everyone except me and had felt uncomfortable about it, but had stayed silent. She said seeing how Kate and I were together, how different the dynamic was, had made her realize that what I'd had before wasn't normal or healthy. I appreciated the apology, but I also knew it came too late to change anything. The validation was nice, but I'd already done the work of validating myself, of recognizing that my needs were legitimate and my feelings mattered. I didn't need external confirmation anymore. Kate and I talked sometimes about the ethics of how we'd gotten together, whether we'd crossed lines before we should have, whether we'd handled things as well as we could have. We both agreed we'd made mistakes, that we'd hurt people, that the situation had been messy and complicated. But we also agreed that sometimes life doesn't offer clean choices. Sometimes you have to choose between staying in situations that diminish you or taking risks that might hurt others. Neither option is perfect. The revenge aspect, if it can be called that, wasn't in planning the party or holding Kate's hand in front of my ex-wife. The real revenge was building a life where I was happy, where I was valued, where I didn't have to beg for basic consideration. It was proving to myself that I deserved better than what I'd accepted for years. It was learning that being alone would have been better than being with someone who made me feel invisible. My ex-wife had laughed when I mentioned my forgotten birthday, had called me childish for caring about such things. But the real childishness was in refusing to see your partner as a full person with legitimate needs for recognition and care. The real childishness was in treating your spouse as less important than acquaintances and coworkers. The real childishness was in only valuing the relationship when you realized you might lose it. I don't keep score anymore. I don't need to. I'm with someone who remembers without being reminded, who celebrates without being asked, who treats me like I matter not because it's my birthday or anniversary, but because that's what you do when you genuinely care about someone. Looking back, I'm grateful for that forgotten birthday. It woke me up to patterns I'd been ignoring, forced me to examine whether I was willing to live the rest of my life feeling like an afterthought in my own marriage. The answer was no, and making that decision, painful and messy as it was, led me to something real and sustaining and mutual. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic or immediate. It's simply refusing to accept less than you deserve and building a life that reflects your actual worth. My ex-wife wanted me to believe I was being childish for wanting to be remembered. Kate showed me that wanting to be valued is the most adult thing you can ask for.